I still remember the day when I decided I need to change the way I work. It was actually a Sunday afternoon in late 2009, almost exactly 10 years ago. I was back then running the European part of Google's AdSense organization. The week before that Sunday afternoon, we had held an offsite for all the managers on our team. And as a result of that, I was now sitting in front of a huge heap of paper. And it was my job to create a master plan out of everything we had discussed. But the more I looked into it, the more I came to the conclusion, this isn't going to work. The business is too big, too complex, too fast-moving. If I am the one who is the first person to discover an opportunity, say in the Spanish market, something is wrong. I'm the wrong person to do that. We hire a lot of smart people. They are closest to the markets. They are closest to the issues. It should be them who make the decision. So ultimately, I decided my job is something entirely different. My job is to create the organization and the culture that makes all that possible. The organization that allows us to delegate the issues to the people who are closest to it. I'm convinced that the future of work is going to be very, very different from what we have seen over the last 70 years. It is no longer going to be managers who decide in detail what their team members are going to do and then measure carefully the results, and managers of the managers doing the same, and so on. No, the future is going to be much more exciting than that, much more creative, much more interesting. The future of work is going to be an organization where we take initiative and responsibility and pass that towards the individual team members as much as possible. They have the most knowledge of the issues. They are the ones who will most likely make the best decisions. And it is about creating a team culture that will allow those team members to size the initiative and to coordinate amongst each other. Because it will be impossible in a modern, fast-moving environment for managers to make decisions and to coordinate fast enough. Turns out, I'm not the only one who is thinking that way. Agile, swarming, new work, the future of work, in German, neue Arbeit. These are all buzzwords describing similar concepts. For today, let's take all of those and let's sum them up into a single vision and let's just call it agile. I am convinced that agile is the only way to build an organization that is capable of adapting fast enough to the ever more complex and fast-changing environments in which modern companies operate. But I'm also convinced that it is not only the most productive, but frankly also the most rewarding and the most fun way of working. Now you will be saying, Johann, that sounds all pretty good, but how do I make such an agile organization happen? And of course, there are some issues, there are some questions. Most notably, how do I make sure that that does not become an organization, just a group of people where everybody does what they want, where nobody is accountable, and where everybody is moving into a different direction so that the whole isn't moving anywhere? I've talked to a lot of people who have built agile organizations over the last many years. And of course, everybody has his or her slightly different way of doing that. I myself am trying to apply 3 principles as I build agile organizations. The first one is alignment. And for that, let me tell you a story which happened a few years ago. I was running the European sales organization for an American technology company. And my boss was the general manager of that company here in Europe. One Monday morning, we sat in a conference room for one of those typical, I like to call them Monday morning management meetings. And we were listening to a couple of updates, quite a number of them actually quite boring, when suddenly our head of finance gets up and almost shouts, "This meeting is a waste of time. We are not discussing the key issue." We were all a little surprised. You don't normally do that, even if you think it. Our boss asked, "What do you mean?" And the head of finance said, "We are no team. We are not aligned on where we want to take the business. In fact, we never even discuss it as a group. This is what we should be doing in this meeting." The head of finance was right. The boss was actually great in discussing strategy with each of us individually. And he was a super smart person. But he never brought the team together. In fact, I always had the suspicion he was slightly afraid of that, because he was the one who sort of wanted to make sure that he's the only one who has what is sometimes called the full picture. Things got better for a while after that Monday morning, but eventually the boss fell back into his old habits. A few weeks later, I went out with that head of finance and I asked him, "Hey, what made you speak up?" And he gave another remarkable answer. And he said, "Johann, I'm 45 years old. I have perhaps 10 good professional years left in front of me." I personally would be less pessimistic than that gentleman, but anyway, that's what he said. And he said, "I want to do something meaningful with that time. I can't do this here. We are not a team. We are not aligned." He eventually left. And that was very surprising, because he was actually one of the most successful people in the company. Others followed. For me, this story is always a great reminder how important it is for a leader to create alignment. And I'm always asking myself, am I doing enough of that? One way how I try doing this is when I attend a team meeting or when I visit some of our offices across Europe, whether this is in Munich, in Paris, in London, I just like to grab the first person I run into and ask, "Hey, can you tell me, what is our goal? What is our strategy? Do you know?" And if that person doesn't know the answer, that's an alarming sign. It's not an alarming sign for that person. It's an alarming sign for me, because it means I have probably not done a good enough job creating alignment in the team. The members of the team need to understand the direction. Only then can they work in an agile manner, because only then can they drive and kick off individual initiatives and still move forward as a whole. The next principle is probably my favorite, and it is highlighting collaboration. The story is a long time back. I was working for an international media corporation. Wiebke did already mention it. And I had just gotten my first promotion to a management role and was invited to an offsite by the leader of the division that I was working in. It was a gentleman called Uwe Swientek. Could tell you a lot about Uwe Swientek. For today, what is important to know is he was a guy born in the late 1930s, and so had a rather traditional set of values. He was somebody who believed in flawless execution, knowing your numbers by heart, and come prepared to every meeting. So I expected a pretty formal offsite. I was very, very surprised when the first morning he walked in jeans and with a very broad smile on his face. And I was even more surprised when I learned that we had no agenda for the entire first day. Instead, Uwe just encouraged us as a team to talk about whatever we thought was most important in groups of 2, 3, 5, whatever we wanted to do. And he, for the entire first day, did nothing but going from table to table, making sure that we all talked amongst each other. So when I later told him that I was surprised how he ran the offsite, he said, Johann, the single most important thing for me to do in such an offsite is make sure that you guys all get to know each other, that you guys all talk amongst each other, that you are comfortable reaching out if you see a problem, and that you're comfortable starting to work together without involving me. The single most important driver of our success, he said, is how well we collaborate as a team. That was a really critical learning for me, and I have tried applying it ever since. Of course, there are different techniques how you can do it. One thing that I like doing is just get people together from different functions and ask them to give you an update. Marketing, sales, PR, product team. And if you then have one of those typical meetings where the salespeople talk about sales, and the marketing people talk about marketing, and the service people talk about services, but they do not talk about how they collaborate amongst each other and any issues they have with that, then you know, well, in fact, those guys aren't collaborating. And even if they tell you, hey, everything is great, challenge that. I just like to ask, really, salespeople? You have no issues with marketing? They are delivering you enough leads? Really, services people? You have no issues with sales over-promising? You can always deliver what they sell? Usually helps getting the key issues up and impressing upon the team how important it is that they work on collaboration. The single most important thing is what Uwe Swientek said back then, which is the single most important driver of our success is how well we collaborate as a team. I really believe that. Let me come to the final principle. And the final principle is accountability. The following is a conversation that I had a few years ago with a young manager on our team. She was probably the most talented first-line manager we had. She had always fantastic numbers. Her team loved her. Team morale was great. She had every reason to feel good about herself. So one day she walked up to me with a cheeky smile and said, "Hey, boss, am I doing a good job?" And I thought, well, you can't say yes now. So I said, "I'm not sure." She looked surprised. And I reminded her of a conversation that we have had a couple of months ago where she told me about some issues that she had in collaborating between herself and the marketing folks, and about a project that she wanted to kick off to fix that issue. I reminded her of that conversation and asked how that project was doing. She admitted that not much had happened. And then she was surprised and said, "But Johann, back then when I told you about that issue, I thought you weren't even aware of it." And my response to that was, I expect managers and all team members that they identify issues independently and that they solve them independently. The fact that I may not have known about the issue will not stop me from holding you accountable for solving it. She had a good sense of humor, slightly tilted her head, looked up at me and said, "Boss, that's a great trick. I'll try that on my team." She got pretty good in it, trust me. For me, that highlights the importance of accountability in Agile. I'm often being asked, "Johann, you believe so much in self-organization. How do you make sure that the teams actually do it?" And I think the best way, at least for me, to do that is to challenge the team members directly, to go and ask, what are the issues that you have recently identified on your team? What are you doing about them? What success are you having? Yes, this requires you getting into the detail, but people actually like being challenged that way. And once you have installed that mindset in the team, trust me, performance really goes up. I personally am convinced that agile is inevitable. This is the future of work. Most of you in the room here, as I see a lot of students, certainly everybody who is below 35, this will be the way how you will be spending most of your career. It will make your teams more successful, and it will allow you to harness more all of the talents you have on your team. Of course, building an agile organization is not always smooth sailing. There are going to be speed bumps, there are going to be issues. But as long as you go and you focus on driving alignment, fostering collaboration, and building accountability, you are on a great way. And trust me, overall, it's going to be a lot easier than you think. So, making your teams more successful and your team members are happier. That sounds like a pretty good combination to me. I'd encourage all of you to try it. You have a great evening, and thank you for your time.